many we are. So we are about 35 participants and we are ready to start. So we're gonna keep talking about probability and statistics. I don't know if you remember last class, we talked about how statistics was able to provide us with collecting the data, analyzing it, summarizing it, interpreting that data, and drawing conclusions out of that data. So do you remember that we took a sample out of a population? So the most important part was getting a sample, measuring a sample instead of measuring the whole population. Sometimes it takes just too long to measure every single part of the population, or it takes too much money, and usually we just want to take a sample. But how do we make sure our sample, is the right sample? Or we also talk about random sample. So remember the example that I gave you with the Fruit Loops? So the sample from the Fruit Loops was that box of cereal was our population. And if we extract some Fruit Loops, that will be our sample. But if our box of Fruit Loops was our sample, then our whole population will be probably all the other boxes that are on the manufacturer. I hope you can grab this concept because it's really important. So can you think of more examples? What about testing done from random people? Do they test every single student, or do they pick a few students? If they find the vaccine for COVID-19, will they test everyone? Or how do they make sure that the ones that they test are random, or they have the same chance? So if you're gonna open a restaurant, I thought about another one. If you open a restaurant and you have a menu, you wanna have different type of people trying that food, right? Like that way your chef is saying, yeah, most of the people, they like the food, so it should be good. So that's what we need, statistics in all of this. Or what about the SAT test? Do they put the same questions to all of the students, or they change the questions? What about if they are testing a car? They're testing either the color of the car. It'll be really hard to test all of the cars, so they probably take a sample and make conclusions out of that sample. Same in the manufacturing plant. Same with the Fruit Loops or the cereal. So statistics are based on a sample. Same, do you remember our leaves that we took a sample out of a tree? But was this sample a really random sample? Or I just grab the first leaf that I could find, because I could not reach the very top of the tree. So what do you understand for random? Have you heard people saying, oh, that's totally random? So what do people mean whenever they say random? So if you're gonna ask your friends, or if you're gonna have a study of which flavor, let's say for example, you're gonna open a restaurant and that restaurant is gonna serve ice cream. If you're gonna see which type of ice cream you should sell, should you just call the contacts on your phone and say, hey, what type of ice cream do you like? Do you like strawberry? Do you like chocolate? Will that be random? Probably not, because I'm not on your contact list. Like, probably you want a bigger population, not only your phone, not only your contacts on your phone. So imagine our population of our class will be the 37 students that we have online right now. So all of those 37 students, that's our population. And then we decided that one of them is gonna win a prize. So if I pick the first person on the list, that wouldn't be random because I already know who is gonna get it. So what random means is like you don't know what's gonna be the outcome until you get the sample. So you don't know you don't know who's gonna be the winner until you get the sample. So if we put all your names on a hat, that will be random because we don't know which one's gonna get picked. So today we're gonna review how do we get a sample, a correct sample that will be a good estimation of our whole population. So in a few words, you don't know what you're gonna be the outcome until you have your sample. So everyone should have the same chance of being picked, equal opportunities. So our sample size, that's we're gonna call it, it's called N. So N is just a variable, is just a variable that is gonna change. Don't get, N is gonna be a variable. So have that one on mind. Don't get too confusing, it's just, and then N means like the sample size could change. It could be 50, it could be 100, it could be 25. So if all participants are 38, maybe our sample is 8. So N is just so in order to get a sample, we could get it two different ways. So it's called design of experiments, and we can make it from an observation or from an experiment. So what will be the difference between an observation and experiment? This is the way you get data. So an observation will be if we sit and observe. So if we sit on a shelter and we can like see the cats, that'll be an observation because we're observing how the cats are behaving. But if we will do an experiment, like what about if we dye the hair of the cats pink? Then that'll be an experiment because you are getting data of how those cats are reacting to dyeing the hair pink. So it depends on how do you treat the subject. So in an observation, you sit and observe something, and of our experiment, you modify the subjects. You will have a control group. So have you heard of a placebo pill that they give to patients just to see the side effects? Well, I don't know much about it, but that could be an example of an experiment. So they have a group, they divide it into two, and some of them, they do have the pill, that they're taking a pill, and some group will have the placebo, which they think it is a pill, but in reality, it has none of the properties that they're looking for. So they're thinking they're taking a pill, and then that's your control group. So that's the experiment. That way they could get data and have something to compare it to. The other one is just M&Ms. So if I sit on a plant and start measuring the M&Ms, that will be an observation. So there are two ways to get your data. Well, how do we make this happen? Well, we have 4 common sample techniques that I'm going to show you. So the first one, in order to get your sample, the first one is convenience. So for example, the example of if you call your friends and they see what's their favorite ice cream, that'll be a convenience because it's just convenient just to open your phone and just call all of them. Or if you have to make a questionnaire and say, okay, let's go to the park, and then the first 5 people that you see in the park. This is not considered a random. This is not considered random because you are picking the hour. Like if you go to the park between 5 and 6, and you're picking your contacts. So we don't use this in statistics, but it's a way to get the sample, and it's called convenience. The second type is a systematic sample. So a systematic sample uses a kth number. So you start from a random sample. So you start getting your data from 1 to 50 or 1 to 100. Or if we go with the Fruit Loops example, we have our data 1 to 25. So it's a little bit more precise, And what this K number means, like you're gonna go every third Fruit Loops, that's gonna be your sample. So you see on the picture on the right, I took kind of like every third Fruit Loops, and then I got my sample. So all of them had the same chance of being picked, but I just decided that my K will be my third. So third, but I could have like being my eighth number or 10 number. So this one's called systematic sample. And you're gonna get your N, which is the number of samples. You need to remember that it's like a little n. We're gonna see a lot of Greek letters. So I want you to start getting familiar with those letters there. N is only a variable, is the number of samples, or is the number of data in your sample. So I want you to start getting familiar with those letters. So on this one, the letter N is the number of samples. And the letter K is the number of samples that you're gonna pick from. If you create K is 3, it's every 3. Or if you case you pick every 20th number, then it's every 20. So another one, it's called stratified sample. So do you know what's the word stratified sample? So I looked in the dictionary what stratified sample means, and it means kind of like a layers. So I got a picture here of the Earth, and then we got stratosphere, we got the atmosphere, we got the mesosphere, we got the thermosphere. So they're kind of like groups. So they're like, if you divide your population in little groups, that will be a stratified sample. But then after you break your sample in groups, then you break it in subgroups. So this is an example, a Fruit Loops example. So first, this could be, so my whole population of the Fruit Loops, I divided into colors. That way they all have the same chance of being picked. But on this one, we are dividing into groups. That way every group is represented. This could be race. We could have Mexicans, we could have Americans, we could have French people, we could have Arabic people, we could have different type of race of groups of people, and they all be represented. And then from here, we decided to pick two of each group. So they all have the same equal opportunity of being picked, but that way we have one of each group. On this case, I picked 2 with the Fruit Loops. So you can see on my sample, I got 2 of each. Another one is called cluster sample. So the cluster sample, if you cluster, the word cluster means a group of similar things or people positioned or occurring closely together. So a cluster is like a bunch of Fruit Loops, or it's a group or a mass. So if you divide your whole population in groups, but this time they're not divided into a category. Like if I have the Fruit Loops, they're all divided into different groups. And yesterday that I was doing these pictures, I had my little ones eating all my samples, and like, those are my samples. So a very key particular thing for the cluster sample is that your sample is gonna be the whole cluster, compared to the stratified sample that you're gonna pick 2 of each of your groups, and that's gonna be your sample. On the cluster sample, you're gonna test your whole group. Like here, I'm gonna test this whole 4 green ones, 3 purples. Like I'm gonna have to test all of those, and they can be combined. Once you get your sample groups, they can, for example, imagine you have 20 clusters of groups. Then you can pick, okay, I'm gonna pick every other one, and that's gonna be my sample. They can combine. But don't forget that always, whenever you're sampling, there's gonna be a sample error. So So what we were trying to do in statistics, we're trying to make a conclusion out of our whole population. So we're trying to find how long does it, or we're trying to find the reliability of the brakes of our car. And then we do some tests and some samples, and we test our data. There's always gonna be an error. So there are gonna be mainly two type of errors. One error will be the non-sampling error, and the other one is a sample error. The non-sampling error is like we made a mistake. Like either we put the numbers wrong or we mess up somewhere. And then the sample error is, it could be a type 1 or type 2, but the sample error is always an error that could happen between your sample, your data, because it's random. So I just want you to take in consideration those two errors. And let me put this. Okay. So now that we got our sample, now we can move to organize and summarize it. So I don't know if you remember the steps for statistics, but the steps, there were like 5 steps. So the first one was getting your sample. And that's what we do in statistics. We test our sample that way by collecting data. So once we collect the data, then we try to organize it, summarize it, analyze it, and interpret, and then make conclusions out of it. So our next step will be organizing the data that we got. So one of the most common ways to organize our data, it's called frequency distribution. So you remember our letter N? That was the number, what was it? Letter N. Was it the number for a whole population, or was the total number for a whole sample? It was the number, the letter N, it was the number of our whole sample. So over here, if we divide the Fruit Loops into 5 classes or into 5 colors, yellow, blue, purple, red, orange, and then we got the sample, imagine if we did what we got: cluster sample, stratified sample, systematic sample, convenience. We don't want to use it. So let's pretend that we have our Fruit Loops and we need to take a sample out of it. We could use a systematic sample. That means every K number, we pick a Fruit Loops, or we could use a stratified sample. That means we divide it into groups of one category. In this case, we pick every 2 or we could do a cluster. So in this case, I did a cluster sample, and I got 5 yellows, 6 blues, 4 purple, 3 reds, and 1 orange. So what will be our N total? So our N will equal to our whole sample, which it'll be 5 plus 6 plus 4 plus 3 plus 1. And what does it add to? 6 plus 4, 10, 19. So our N in this case will be 19. So from now that we want to organize this data, next class, we're gonna try to explain what will be the most common way to organize our frequency distribution, and kind of like explain a little bit more. So our next class, I'm proposing Saturday from 10 to 11:30, and I'm gonna need you to bring a calculator. I hope you're getting these concepts. I know it's a lot of words, I know it's but I just want you to get this concept right. That way, whenever it gets more complicated, you understand what I'm talking about, or we have more letters. I just don't want you to throw a lot of formulas before I want you to kind of like understand why, the concept behind it. So if you have any questions, feel free to send it to me to the Remind app or through here. I'll try to answer them as soon as I can and share it with the team. And thanks for watching. That will be all for today. So this was a quick class, and I think we're finalizing. I'll and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you, guys. And Saturday class will be 10 to 11:30.